The sun was barely above the horizon, coloring the River Grove sky a soft pink. Sunday morning in this small Tennessee town usually began with silence, broken only by the chime of the local church. But today the usual calm was shattered by the shrill scream of Michael Parsons echoing down the quiet street. Michael had returned home after a night shift at the construction site. He entered the house quietly, trying not to wake his wife, but he found Emily lying on the kitchen floor in a pool of her own blood. Her blue eyes, now empty and lifeless, stared up at the ceiling, and dark bruises were visible around her neck. Sheriff Gardner was the first to arrive on the scene, followed by paramedics and patrol officers. The Parsons house quickly became a crime scene, fenced off with yellow tape. "We're calling in an investigator from Nashville," the sheriff announced as he examined the body. "This is the first homicide in River Grove in 7 years, and I want it done right." Detective Sarah Coleman arrived 3 hours later. Her black SUV stood out among the shabby pickup trucks of the locals. A tall woman in a strict pantsuit with short brown hair and a penetrating gaze, she immediately caught the attention of the gathered gawkers. "Detective Coleman, Homicide, Nashville," she showed her badge to Sheriff Gardner. "Tell us what we have here." "Emily Parsons, 29 years old. Husband found her around 5:30 this morning when he returned from the night shift. Strangulation, by the looks of it. No sign of forced entry. Body was found in the kitchen." Sarah nodded and walked into the house. A modest but cozy one-story house. Pictures of the happy couple on the walls. Emily was beautiful, blonde hair, bright smile. Michael was a sturdy man with kind eyes. In the kitchen, the medical examiner was already finishing his initial examination. Death occurred sometime between 22 hours and midnight. Signs of struggle are minimal. The victim most likely knew her attacker or let him in voluntarily, he reported. Sarah looked around the room carefully. There were 2 cups of unfinished tea on the table, so Emily had a guest. "Where's the husband?" she asked. "On the veranda. He's in shock," the sheriff replied. Michael Parsons sat staring into the void, his hands visibly shaking. His face reddened with tears, his eyes puffy. "Mr. Parsons, I'm Detective Coleman. I'm very sorry for your loss." Sarah crouched down next to him. "But I need to ask you a few questions." "I don't understand. Who would—" "Emily didn't do anything to hurt anyone." His voice shook. "You were working at night, right? Can you tell me more about it?" "I own a construction company. We're building a new bridge over the river, working double shifts. Yesterday, I was on the night shift, 8 p.m. to 5 in the morning. There are dozens of people there who can attest to that." "When was the last time you saw your wife alive?" "Last night, before she left for work. She said she was going to read and go to bed early. Do you know if she had anyone visiting?" Michael shook his head. "She didn't say anything." "And how has your relationship been lately?" Something flashed in his eyes. "Uncertainty? Fine. I mean, Emily's had a lot on her plate at church lately. She's been helping with charity events, often staying for evening services." Sarah made a note in her notebook. "What church?" "River Grove, First Baptist Church. Reverend Graves is our pastor. Emily and I have been going there since we were kids." By noon, a small group of people, close friends and relatives, had gathered at the Parsons house. Among them, Sarah spotted a tall, middle-aged man in a strict black suit who spoke quietly to the weeping women, offering comfort. "Reverend Jonathan Graves," the sheriff introduced him, "the spiritual leader of our township." The pastor looked impeccable, neatly trimmed graying hair, shrewd brown eyes, strong hands. His voice sounded deep and soothing as he shook the detective's hand. "This is a terrible tragedy, Detective. Emily was the light of our community," he said, and Sarah noticed the genuine sorrow in his eyes. "When was the last time you saw Mrs. Parsons, Reverend?" "Friday night, at choir practice. She sang beautifully." His voice trembled slightly. "I can't believe anyone would hurt her." "Has she seemed worried or scared lately?" The pastor thought for a moment. "Now that you ask, she may have been a bit distracted in recent weeks, but I assumed it had to do with church work." Sarah continued to interview other parishioners and Emily's friends. Gradually, a picture began to emerge. A sweet, devoted wife, an active parishioner, always willing to help others. But several people mentioned that Emily had changed in recent months. Quieter, more thoughtful, sometimes seeming distant. Toward evening, Sarah noticed a woman sitting alone in the living room. Red-haired, wearing a modest black dress, she was absent-mindedly poring over a rosary. "Did you know Emily?" Sarah asked, taking a seat next to her. "Rachel Thompson. We've been best friends since we were kids." The woman tried to smile, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. "I'm the organist at our church. Emily and I spent a lot of time together." "What kind of person was Emily like?" "Kind, faithful, a true Christian." Rachel paused. "At least that's what I always thought." "What do you mean?" Rachel looked around, making sure no one could hear them. "She's changed in recent months, became secretive, often stayed late at church, said she was helping with charity work or participating in prayer groups, but I went back to church one night, forgot the sheet music. Emily was there with Reverend Graves in his office. They said it was spiritual counseling, but..." Rachel hesitated. "Something about their look struck me as odd. I don't want to sin of assumption, Detective. Maybe it really was just a counseling session." Rachel's words made Sarah hesitate. She returned to the Parsons house where the forensics team was finishing up their work. After searching Emily's bedroom thoroughly, she found a small diary in a dresser drawer under a stack of neatly folded sweaters. Flipping through a few pages, she found entries about spiritual meetings and special prayers. In the bathroom, Sarah methodically checked the cabinets and drawers. Behind a box of cosmetics, she found something that made her heart beat faster: a small cardboard package of a pregnancy test. Carefully, she took the test out and saw 2 distinct stripes. Sarah went back into the bedroom and opened Emily's journal again, looking through it more carefully now. On the last completed page was a short entry. "Lord, give me the strength to tell the truth. Tomorrow I must come clean. I can no longer live a lie." Sarah Coleman stood at the window in Sheriff Gardner's office, watching the fog slowly descend on the hills of River Grove. Early Monday morning brought with it not only a chill but also the first results of the autopsy. "Official confirmation, Detective." Dr. Harris, the local medical examiner, handed her a folder with the report. "Cause of death is asphyxia by strangulation. Time of death confirmed to be between 22 hours and midnight on Saturday. And yes, Emily Parsons was pregnant, approximately 8 weeks." Sarah nodded, looking through the paperwork. "Any signs of a struggle?" "Minimal. A few bruises on her wrists. She knew her killer and probably didn't expect an attack." "Anything under her fingernails? Fibers? DNA?" "Nothing significant. She didn't put up much of a fight." Sarah tapped her pen thoughtfully on the edge of the desk. Pregnancy complicated the picture. Who could interfere with a pregnant Emily? "Sheriff, I need accurate information on the movements of everyone close to Emily on the night of the murder." An hour later, a timeline appeared on a whiteboard in the sheriff's office. Michael Parsons claimed to have been at the bridge construction site from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m., and dozens of workers could confirm it. Reverend Graves said he held an evening service until 9 and then went home to prepare a Sunday sermon. His wife was away visiting a sick sister in Chattanooga, so there was no one to corroborate his alibi. Rachel Thompson claimed to have been home all evening watching television alone. "There are contradictions," Sarah observed as she studied the notes. "Michael says he left for work at 8 o'clock, but Mrs. Jenkins's neighbor saw his car outside the house until about 8:30, and Reverend Graves says he drove straight home after the service. But Tom Wilkins, who owns a gas station on the outskirts of town, claims to have seen his car around 10 p.m. in the opposite direction from the house." Sarah decided to talk to Michael again. She found him at her and Emily's house where he was packing for the funeral. He looked terrible, unshaven, with eyes reddened from crying. "Mr. Parsons, I'd like to clarify some details." Sarah took a seat next to him on the couch. "Ask away." His voice sounded lifeless. "Saturday night you said you left for work at 8 o'clock, but your neighbor saw your car much later." Michael rubbed his eyes. "Yeah, I forgot something and came back. Blueprints for a project. It only took a few minutes." "Why didn't you mention it before?" "Didn't think it was important. I was in such shock." Sarah nodded, taking notes. "Mr. Parsons, I have to ask you a personal question. What has your relationship with Emily been like lately?" Michael lowered his gaze, his hands nervously rubbing the edge of his shirt. We've been having difficulties," he finally admitted. "For the last few months we haven't been close. Physically, I mean. Why? He was silent for a long time. I had a serious infection a year ago, complications from the flu. Doctors said I probably couldn't have children. Emily really wanted a baby. It hit us hard. Sarah felt the pieces of the puzzle begin to fit together. You knew Emily was pregnant? Michael's face contorted with shock. What? No, that's impossible. The autopsy confirmed it. 8 weeks. And we found a pregnancy test in her things. Michael jumped to his feet, his face pale. There's some kind of mistake, or... He stammered, realization slowly creeping onto his face. Or she... My God, is she... Mr. Parsons, do you have any idea who the father might have been? Michael stared into space, his hands clenched into fists. I don't. I can't think about it right now. The next item on Sarah's list was Rachel Thompson. She found the organist at the church where she was playing a quiet, sad melody that filled the empty hall. Beautiful, Sarah said as she approached the organ. Rachel shuddered, stopping the playing. Detective, I didn't hear you come in. Miss Thompson, you mentioned that Emily was spending time with Reverend Graves. Could you please elaborate? Rachel glanced around nervously, as if she was afraid they might be overheard. I was talking about spiritual counseling. I think there was something else. Emily was pregnant. Rachel's eyes widened. Pregnant? But Michael couldn't. Exactly. That's why I need the truth, Rachel. What do you know? Rachel took a deep breath. About 3 months ago, I happened to see them, not in a church. They were in a park on the outskirts of town, in the Reverend's car. They were kissing. I didn't want to believe my eyes. Reverend Graves is a married man, a spiritual leader. Emily was my best friend. I asked her about it later, but she denied it. Said I was imagining things. Did you tell anyone? No. It would have ruined their lives, divided the community. I prayed that what I saw was a mistake or that they would come to their senses. And the Reverend, did he know you saw them? I don't think so. I never talked to him about it. Sarah nodded, making notes. Another question. Where were you on Saturday night between 10 and midnight? Rachel visibly tensed. I already told you. At home, watching TV. Can anyone confirm that? No. I live alone. After talking to Rachel, Sarah went back to the station and requested Michael's medical records. Confirmation soon came. A year ago, he had indeed suffered a severe infection, a complication of which had caused permanent infertility. There was no way Emily could get pregnant with her husband. Sarah reread Emily's diary again, paying attention to the dates. About 2 months before her death, the entries became particularly emotional. I know I'm sinning, but I can't stop. The Lord sees my heart. It is full of both love and remorse at the same time. 3 weeks later, Jay says we have to be careful. No one will understand, but our meetings are the only thing that makes me happy. And the last entry, made on the day of her death. Everything has changed. I must tell the truth, even though it will ruin many lives. A child deserves better. Next on Sarah's list was Reverend Graves. She found him in the office at the church where he was preparing for Emily's funeral. Reverend, I'd like to ask you a few questions about your whereabouts the night of the murder, Sarah began, taking a seat across from him. Of course. He looked collected, but Sarah noticed the nervous twitching of a muscle in his face. You said you went straight home after the evening service, which ended at 9. However, Tom Wilkins from the gas station saw your car around 10 in the opposite direction. The Reverend turned slightly pale. Yeah, I may have stopped at the store. I don't remember exactly. What store is open in a small town after 9 on a Saturday night, Reverend? He was silent for a moment. I used to go to the lake. Sometimes I walk there when I need to think, to prepare for a sermon. It helps me clear my thoughts. In the dark? I had a flashlight. I do that a lot. Sarah changed tactics. Reverend, how well did you know Emily? She was a devoted parishioner, actively involved in the life of the church. Is that all she was? Rachel Thompson mentioned your spiritual counseling. His gaze darted to the side. Yes, Emily sometimes came for counseling, as did many of the other parishioners. And those counseling sessions always took place here at the church? Of course, he answered a little too quickly. You never met her, say, in the park or in the car? Reverend Graves stood up abruptly, his face hard. Detective, I don't know what you're getting at, but your innuendo is inappropriate. I'm a respected man in this town, a spiritual advisor to many people, including Emily, who was 8 weeks pregnant, Sarah said calmly, by a man who was definitely not her husband since Michael is infertile. Graves turned even paler, frantically clutching the edge of the table. It's a terrible tragedy. I was unaware of her condition. Sarah watched his reaction carefully. Either he was an excellent actor, or he really didn't know about the pregnancy. Reverend, I have a witness who saw you and Emily in a situation beyond the normal pastor-parishioner relationship. His hands trembled visibly. Who? What did they see? That doesn't matter. More important is what you have to say. The pastor was silent for a long moment, then sank back into his chair as if his legs refused to hold him up. We had a relationship, he finally admitted, his voice becoming almost a whisper. I know it was wrong. I broke my vows, betrayed the trust of the congregation, my wife. But I loved Emily, I really did. How long has it been going on? About 5 months. Started with spiritual conversations, grew into something more. I tried to resist, we both did, but... You knew she was pregnant? He shook his head. No, she didn't say anything. Where were you between 10 and midnight on Saturday? I said by the lake, then home. Can anyone confirm that? No, my wife is away. Sarah closed the notebook. Reverend, I think you should consider hiring a lawyer. Walking out of the church, Sarah ran into Michael, who appeared to be looking for her. Detective, I remembered something. That night before she left for work, Emily said she was expecting someone, said she needed to talk to this person about something important. Did she give a name? No, but she was very nervous. I figured it had to do with church business. Sarah nodded. Thank you, Mr. Parsons. It could be important. Back at the Parsons house, Sarah took another thorough look around the kitchen where the body had been found. 2 cups of tea. Emily was waiting for someone. They were talking. Then the conversation had obviously gone wrong. In the kitchen table drawer, she found a notebook with phone numbers. Flipping through it, she noticed a number signed simply with the letter J with a heart next to it. It could have stood for Jonathan, Reverend Jonathan Graves. Rain pounded monotonously against the windows of the River Grove funeral home. Sarah Coleman stood apart from the crowd of mourners, watching the farewell to Emily Parsons. The young woman's body lay in an open casket, surrounded by white lilies, Emily's favorite flowers, as Michael had said. The face of the deceased was serene, as if she had simply been sleeping. The skillful work of the makeup artist had hidden the marks of a brutal death. Reverend Graves delivered the funeral eulogy. Sarah watched him carefully. Despite the professional clarity of his words, his voice occasionally trembled and unshed tears stood in his eyes. Real grief or skillful acting? Emily was the light of our community, an example of true Christian virtue, the pastor spoke, and for a moment their gazes met with Sarah's. He quickly averted his eyes. After the ceremony, Sarah approached Rachel Thompson, who was holding herself apart. Emily kept correspondence with the pastor? Letters? Messages? The detective asked quietly. Rachel paused, then nodded. She mentioned a cell phone she only used to communicate with him, a prepaid one so Michael wouldn't find out. I don't know where she kept it. Do you have a key to Emily's house? Yes, she gave me a spare a few years ago, in case she lost hers. I need to take another look around the house. It would be best if you came with me. They waited until the memorial service was over and most people had dispersed. Michael had left with Emily's parents and the house was empty. Rachel opened the door with her key. Where would Emily hide something she didn't want to show Michael? Sarah asked, looking around the hallway. Rachel wondered. She always loved books. She had a special shelf of religious literature. Michael never touched it. In the living room, they found a small bookcase filled with Bibles, sermon collections, and religious tracts. Sarah methodically began checking each book, flipping through the pages. In a tattered edition of the Song of Songs, she found the first note. In Emily's small, neat handwriting it read, J, meet me at the usual place today. Miss you, E. Between the pages of the other books were several other notes like this one. Look here, Rachel pointed to a massive family Bible on the bottom shelf. Emily treasured it very much. It was a gift from her grandmother. Sarah carefully opened the ancient book. The front cover was inscribed with names and dates, the Parsons Family Chronicle. Flipping through the heavy pages, she noticed that several leaves had been cut out in the middle of the book, forming a hiding place. Inside lay a cheap prepaid cell phone. Bingo! Sarah turned the device on. The battery was almost dead, but the phone still worked. There was only one number in the contact list under the name Jay. Sarah looked through the message history. Dozens of texts exchanged between Emily and Reverend Graves. They hadn't used names in their messages, but the content left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. "My soul longs for you as the earth longs for rain," wrote Jay. "Every minute away from you is a trial," Emily replied. Sarah scrolled through the messages to the last few days. The tone of the correspondence had changed. "We can't go on like this. What is between us is beautiful, but built on lies," Emily wrote a week before her death. "Patience, my love. Just a little more time and we'll find a solution," replied Jay. The last messages were sent on the day of the murder. To Emily, "I have to see you today. There is news that will change everything." Jay, "What's wrong?" Emily, "Not over the phone. Come over at 10 when Michael leaves for work." Jay, "I will." The last message from Emily was sent at 9:45 p.m. "Waiting for you. Made tea." Sarah snapped a picture of the correspondence and continued her examination. In another book, a collection of sermons, she found another note, this time in a different handwriting, more sprawling. "My dear, we must be more careful. Rachel suspects something. She's been asking strange questions about our meetings. You knew more than you were saying." Sarah turned to Rachel. The woman lowered her gaze. "I didn't want to believe it. Reverend Graves was an example to us all. Emily was my best friend." "What happened that night, Rachel? You weren't at home watching TV, were you?" Rachel took a deep breath. "I saw the Reverend's car parked a block away. I've been following Emily for weeks. Wanted to catch them, make them stop this madness." "Did you see him go into the house?" "Yes. Around 10 o'clock at night. I waited outside, gathering my courage to go in and tell them everything. An hour later, I saw him come out. He looked agitated, almost running to his car. And you didn't tell them about it sooner because I was scared, thought I might be suspected, since I had a key to the house and I was there in the neighborhood. Plus," she stammered, "besides, I loved Emily. I always have, not just as a friend." Her voice shook. "When she started spending more and more time with the Reverend, I was beyond jealous. But I would never hurt her." With the evidence gathered, Sarah went to question Reverend Graves. This time, she summoned him to the police station. The pastor looked haggard as he entered the interrogation room. "Reverend, I have proof of your connection to Emily." Sarah placed the printouts of the messages on the table. "And a witness who saw you enter Emily's house the night of the murder and leave there about an hour later." Graves lowered his head. "I've already acknowledged our relationship. But not that you were at her house before she died. Not that she informed you she was pregnant." Sarah watched his reaction carefully. "Pregnancy?" He looked up at her. "She didn't tell me anything about pregnancy that night." "Then what was this emergency meeting about?" The pastor was silent for a long moment. "Emily said she couldn't live a lie anymore. Wanted to confess our relationship to Michael. Hoped I'd leave my wife and we'd be together." "And how did you react?" I freaked out. Asked her to wait. Said we needed to think things over carefully. My reputation, the church, the community, everything would be ruined. Motive enough for murder. I didn't kill her." Graves raised his voice. "Yes, I was there. Yes, we had an argument, but when I left, she was alive. I swear to God, she was alive." "And the note?" "I'm sorry, but I have to tell Michael. Our baby deserves the truth." "She didn't show it to you?" The pastor turned pale. "No, she hasn't mentioned the baby." Sarah wasn't sure whether to believe him. "Did you know Michael was infertile?" "No, how would I know such a thing? It's a private family matter." "So you didn't suspect that the child could be yours?" Detective, I swear I didn't know about the pregnancy until you told me about it. If Emily had been pregnant by me, I don't know what I would have done, but I certainly wouldn't have killed her. Sarah decided to change tactics. When you entered Emily's house, was the door locked? No, she left it ajar for me. And when you left? Yeah, I don't remember. I think I just slammed it shut behind me. You didn't lock it? No, I didn't have a key. Sarah nodded. After you left, anyone could have gotten in the house. The pastor remained silent, looking at his hands. Back at the station, Sarah found Sheriff Gardner reviewing the surveillance video. Find anything? She asked. Probably. The camera at the Wilkins gas station captured Graves' car at 10:05 when he drove to the Parsons house and 11:15 when he came back. But there was something else. At 11:30, a blue sedan drove past the gas station. It was driven by a woman who looked like Rachel Thompson. Sarah wondered. She admitted to watching the house, saw Graves go in and out. What if she wasn't just watching? The sheriff suggested. That same night, Sarah found Rachel at home. The woman looked scared when she opened the door. Detective, is something wrong? We need to talk, Rachel. Sarah stepped into the house. You said you were watching Emily's house, saw Reverend Graves come and go, but you didn't say you went into the house after him yourself. Rachel took a step back. I didn't. Your car was caught on the Wilkins gas station camera. You drove through there at 11:30 after Graves left. Where were you going, Rachel? Home. I was just driving home. From the other side of town? Through the Wilkins gas station? Rachel sank into a chair, her hands shaking. I didn't kill her. God, I loved her. But you entered the house after the Reverend left. What happened? Tears streamed down Rachel's face. I wanted to talk to her. When I saw the pastor run out of the house, I thought maybe they had a fight, and now Emily needed a friend. I used my key. Emily was in the kitchen, crying. She told me she was pregnant by the Reverend, that she wanted to tell Michael everything, to start a new life. She thought the pastor would leave his wife for her, but he refused. And what did you say? I tried to comfort her, told her I'd always be there for her, and then... Rachel fell silent. What happened then, Rachel? I confessed my feelings to her. I told her I'd loved her for years. I told her I could help her raise the baby. She was shocked. She said she could never reciprocate my feelings, that she loved the pastor no matter what, that I should leave and never bring it up again. And that made you angry? No. I mean, yes, I was upset, but I would never... She fell silent again. What happened next, Rachel? Rachel took a deep breath. I left. Emily was alive when I left, I swear. Sarah wasn't entirely convinced. Your fingerprints should be on the cups you drank the tea from. We didn't drink tea. Emily offered, but I declined. Someone had tea with her. There were 2 cups on the table. Must have been the pastor. Sarah continued to press on. What state was Emily in when you left? Upset, but determined. Said she was going to tell Michael about their relationship and the baby anyway. And you just left? Yes, I was too humiliated to stay. Sarah scrutinized her face. Where's your car, Rachel? In the garage. Why? I need to take a look at it. A blue sedan was parked in the garage. Sarah looked around the interior. No visible marks. Have you washed the car this week? Rachel shook her head. No. Why would I? Sarah adjusted her glasses. Just checking out all the possibilities. The investigation hit a dead end. 3 people, each with a motive, each of whom could have been at Emily's house shortly before her death. Sarah was rereading her notes when the phone call rang. The medical examiner had found something on the victim's clothing, a fiber from a red wool glove. A red glove? Sarah interjected. Yeah, pretty unusual for this time of year. Sarah remembered seeing similar gloves at Michael's house. She immediately went there. Michael looked surprised when he opened the door. Detective, any news? Mr. Parsons, do you have any red wool gloves? He hesitated. Yeah, I had some somewhere. Haven't worn them in a while. Why? May I see them? Michael reluctantly let her in. They should be in the dresser drawer. But the gloves weren't there. Sarah noticed Michael's nervousness. Strange. Where could they have gone? He spread his hands. Mr. Parsons, I have a few more questions. You said you were at work from 8 o'clock the night of the murder, but before that you went home to get the blueprints. How much time did you spend at home? A few minutes. Emily said she was waiting for someone. Did she say who exactly? No, but she was tense. And you didn't ask who she was waiting for so late? Michael averted his gaze. We haven't been communicating very well lately. Sarah looked at him intently. Mr. Parsons, were you aware of your wife's affair with Reverend Graves? His face contorted. What? No, that's impossible. We have proof, and we know Emily was pregnant by him. Michael's face turned purple. That can't be. Emily would never. Michael, where were you really between 10 and midnight on Saturday? He fell silent, then sank abruptly onto the couch, covering his face with his hands. I came back, I forgot to tell her something important about tomorrow. Saw the Reverend's car outside, got curious. What's he doing at our place so late? I waited outside. An hour later, he ran out of the house like he was being chased. Rachel came in after him. I saw her use her key. You went into the house after her? I waited until she left. It took about 20 minutes. Then I came in. Emily was sitting at the table drinking tea. Looking exhausted, I asked what was going on. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said she was pregnant. Not by me, of course. She knew I was infertile. What happened next? I asked who the father was. She wouldn't say. She just said she was leaving me, starting a new life. I guessed it was Reverend Graves. Everything fell into place. Her aloofness, the constant evening services. I lost control. I grabbed her by the shoulders, started shaking her, demanded the truth. She tried to break free. I didn't want to kill her. I just held her too tight. When I realized she wasn't breathing, it was too late. And then you faked coming home from work. Michael nodded, tears streaming down his face. I went back to construction, worked my shift, and found her body in the morning. No one would have known. Sarah pulled out the handcuffs. Michael Parsons, you're under arrest for the murder of Emily Parsons. As the police officers led Michael away, Sarah glanced at the picture of the happy couple on the wall. Emily was smiling into the lens, unaware of the tragedy her forbidden feelings would turn out to be. How many lives had been ruined because of one broken commandment?